Yes, hello, this is Connor from Lux Natura Audio. I'm back once again with Tone Tailors, and today we're checking out a project we made using a vintage 1966 Precision Bass. This bass came to Tone Tailors on consignment and was in fantastic condition for its age. It was truly a gem and was super resonant, amazing to play, and so we had to make a track to honor its place in music history. We wanted to create a retro, soul-sounding track harkening back to the days of Motown and James Jamerson, and so I think we achieved that, but how close do you think we got? Leave a comment below, and if you have an instrument like this you'd like to consign with Tone Tailors, or find one for your own collection for that matter, check out Tone Tailors' website, the link is in the description below, but now let's go check out the project. Alright, so we're in Logic Pro. You can see I have my session pulled up. We have a drum track, a bass track, and a guitar track. And the reason I say 3 tracks total is because the way that we recorded this was truly in the style of Motown and the limitations they would have found themselves to have at the time, which was in the late 60s an 8-track tape recorder. So that's what we committed to today. We have the drums on one track, the bass on another, and the guitars, all 3 parts, on a single track. Additionally, there are some parallel processes that are going on. There's a parallel bass track. There's a sub kick, which I know would not have been quite accurate to the actual capabilities of Motown or even most consumer devices to recreate that frequency range, but it's there. And then there's some drum reverb and some guitar reverb, which are both using the Sunset Sound from IK Multimedia EMT 140 plate reverb, which is what would have been at Motown at the time. So let's listen to the track, we'll get a feel for what it sounds like, and then we'll listen to the bass in isolation and really dissect the tonalities that this legendary instrument had to offer. So there you have it. It is a very mono-compatible, completely mono track, but still there's a lot of depth and a certain degree of bleed between all the instruments, and that's the routing that I have going on here. But before we really break things down, let's just listen to this bass. And a little bit of backstory on this bass. This was a consignment piece that we received from a local family. The original owner of this bass had 3 vintage basses total that were brought on his behalf to Tone Tailors, and they included this 66 P bass, a 70s Tele bass, and a 70s Rickenbacker 4001 bass. So some really rare, fun vintage finds, and we were able to relocate them to great new homes. So if you or someone you know has instruments that maybe upon someone's passing need to be relocated again, Tone Tailors is always available to help you through that process. Email Glenn@tonetailors.com, it's GLENN at tonetailors.com, or fill out the submission form on our website to get that ball rolling. But yeah, this was a really great opportunity to interact with a legendary instrument and create a track and kind of honor the era in which this bass was produced and most iconic. So let's listen to the bass on its own and just get a feel for what it sounds like outside the context of the mix. So yeah, just a very mid-focused yet punchy sound, a sound that fills out all of the low end needed. I mean, this bass in and of itself was just a sub-machine. It was just so resonant. You can see the crossfade here at the end of the project because this thing would have just resonated, I think, for another at least 20 seconds or so. And so, you know, that's what you want in a vintage instrument. You want all of that character, you want all of that life, but then you want the sustain and the harmonic content that really just makes it a unique voice. What I'm going to do here as well is I'm going to pull all of this processing off so you can really just hear the DI signal itself. I'm even going to pull off most of the master processing here so that you get a pure representation of what this bass sounded like plugged directly into an interface, much like what would have been going on at Motown at the time, because they didn't really use amps, they just used DI boxes and recorded it straight to tape. So let's hear the bass literally on its own with very, very little to no processing. So this bass did have round wound strings. I think you would have found a P bass in the Motown studios to have flat wounds and probably foam at the bridge to really give that thumping, dampened sound. However, we didn't really want to mess with the setup because it was so perfect when it came into us for the most part. So we don't know what the strings were, but they sounded great and they really complemented the bass itself. So now we have all of the processing back on the bass channel, which includes the Helix Native plugin. We're modeling an Ampeg B15 style amp and cab, and then that would be running into the SSL EV2 channel strip. And then that hits a vintage FET style compressor just to kind of control those dynamics. That is then followed by the Universal Audio Oxide tape recorder, which is a characteristic sound of a lot of Motown records. They were always hitting the tape super hard, harder than maybe they should have, but that's what gave it that beautiful vintage distortion and push. So we're using the Oxide tape recorder there, and then finally I'm using Ozone to kind of carve out a little bit of the low end because this bass had so much sub-content, it wasn't quite characteristic of the Motown sound. A lot of the time they would have been filtering anywhere from like 50 to 70 hertz because again, tape and consumer devices and records especially just could not reproduce that on a consumer level at that time. So tried to stay accurate to the era in that regard. There is also an additional layer of processing that I chose to use on this track, again limiting us to 8 tracks total. So we have drums on 1, bass on 2, guitar on 3. On the 4th track, I'm doing a parallel bass channel, which is another technique that Motown would have used, particularly for their vocals. They would have left the vocal pretty dry, uncompressed, uneq'd, and then they would have created a parallel track where the vocal was pushed with lots of top end and compression, and that's effectively what I'm doing with the bass, since that's kind of our vocal in this context. I'm using this channel EQ plugin in Logic, carving out all the top and low end and just leaving this mid bump. And then that is running into a Fairchild style compressor to really give just lots of glue and lots of harmonic presence to the mid-range of the bass, so that it would have been reproducible in mono particularly. So let's listen to the bass one more time with all of that in mind and the stereo processing on the master bus as well, which I'll get into later. But this is as close to that kind of iconic Motown mid-rangey but yet full bass sound I could get. So that's the bass sound. Let's go over the other instruments in this track. The drums are the 60s Soul producer kit from Logic, which is this pawn shop style kit, and the black brass snare, which I thought really gave a nice open, slappy Motown style snare sound. The thing with the drums at Motown were that they were kind of pieced together and they were truly a pawn shop style, piece by piece kit. So tried to kind of get that sound with this. You can hear the kick. Very open, very much a room sound. The toms, same thing. And then the snare as well. Just super open, kind of bombastic, but that was the sound that was going on there because of all the bleed and the small room that they were in. So let's hear the drums on their own just really quick. You can also hear there's a tambourine doubling the snare, which is another huge part of the drum sound, was that kind of auxiliary percussion, and specifically a tambourine would have been used pretty often. Additionally, there's a sub kick going on just for a little bit of extra low end, as much as I could manage to keep the authenticity of the recording. And then there's the drum reverb, which is the EMT 140 style plate reverb from IK Multimedia. It's the Sunset Sound studio reverb. Again, this is what would have been at Motown besides maybe the echo chamber and some springs potentially, but this was the main sound of that beautiful musical reverb. For the guitars, I actually played the guitars on this track, and of course we were going for that kind of doo-woppy style proto-funk sound. The guitars sound like this on their own. So I played those tracks on a Tokai 70s Strat, a lawsuit era Strat. Again, another rarity from the Tone Tailors Used wall, so definitely check the website and see what's coming in. You never know what you're gonna find. And now, you can see that I have down here the mono button checked, because we've been listening to this all in mono, and I really do think that it has lots of depth, it has lots of separation, even for being completely collapsed. And that was a huge characteristic of Motown music and, the 60s. Engineers weren't sure what to do with stereo imaging yet, so they just kind of hard pan things like crazy. But also that means that it's super mono compatible. So let's check out the stereophonic version of this track. Although that was a short track, I think we got pretty close to that timeless Motown sound. What do you think? Let us know in the comments below. And if you're looking for an instrument of this caliber, new or used, definitely check out Tone Tailors' website. The link is in the description below. Like this video, subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.